This tutorial is going to show you how to do a mock-up design. Say this is a TV show that I'm pitching and I'd like to make a poster for this to promote it. Photoshop is really useful to create something like this quickly and easily and have it look really good. All these images are high quality and you can see that there's different subjects. Using high quality images is really important in Photoshop. This website, pexels.com, you can search for images here, and they tend to be really good quality, nice detail, creative, and free to use in your projects. So I grabbed a bunch of images here that I'll be using for this tutorial. First, let's go to Photoshop. We want to create a new file. You click the Create New button, and then we need to choose a preset. Up the top, you'll see all these different presets for sizes. We're going to use Print. You can click View All Presets to see all the different sizes. And the importance with a poster is just in case you're going to get it printed, you'd like it to be high resolution. These presets all include high resolution settings. So say you want to use an A3 poster, you would click A3. But for today we're going to use an A4 poster, and I'll click A4. Over on the right side here, you'll notice that it has all the measurements set already. Let's change the name to be Poster, and the width and the height are set automatically. The resolution is something to keep in mind. Make sure when you're working in Photoshop, you have resolution of a minimum of 300. This means that if you print it out, it'll come out clear and crisp. Anything lower and you may get pixelation. The orientation here, you can change to be portrait or landscape. I'm going to go with portrait and click Create. Here's our Photoshop file, and we have one single layer here in the Layers tab. This is our blank background. So first off, I always recommend saving your file. File, Save As. And I'm going to save this as poster. Make sure your format is Photoshop, choose your location and click Save. Photoshop doesn't automatically save as you work, so you'll be wanting to save periodically as you create your design. So let's go back to my images. I'm going to use this shot of this boy up close with a nice blurry background. I'll open that in Photoshop. And you'll notice when you have two files open in Photoshop, you have two tabs up the top, and you can click back and forth between these. I want to copy this image and paste it onto my original file, and to do that, click and drag on the layer, hover over the original file, bring it down into the middle and release your mouse, and there's your shot. And now you'll notice that the boy is actually a bit zoomed in than what I'd like. The Move tool up here on the top left allows you to move what layer you've selected. So you can see that he's actually too big for my canvas. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to zoom out, and that's Control plus and minus, or Alt and scroll on your mouse wheel. I'll zoom out a little bit and you can see that I want to make him just a bit smaller. So a quick and easy tool to do this is Free Transform. The first step is to make sure you have the layer that you'd like to transform selected. Selection means it goes to this light gray color. To save confusion in the future, let's name all of our layers as soon as we make them. So I'll double click and then type in boy. Now I'd like to shrink this image of the boy down to fit the page a bit better. To use that, I'm going to use Edit Free Transform, and the shortcut for this is Command T or Control T. And now you have to make sure that the layer you have selected is the layer you'd like to transform. Now you'll notice I get these bounding boxes on the outside of my image, and this shows the actual border of the boy image outside of my canvas. You can shrink the image down, and you want to hold Shift while you're shrinking to keep your proportions to be the same. Otherwise, it'll squash the image. So I'm going to shrink it down, and then I'll click in the middle and move it up, and then I'll stretch this out to fill up the image, about there. And when you're happy, click the tick button. Now using my Move tool, I can make sure the boy layer is selected, and I can move him up and down. And if you want to get some fine movement with your moving, you can use your arrow keys, going down, left and right, and back up. So that's if you need a bit more of a fine tune on your moving. So let's zoom back in. So for my TV series, it's about a boy who can see into the future. So I want to do something with his glasses here to kind of give the effect that it's a metaphor for him being able to see in the future. So I might change the color in his glasses here. So what I want to do is actually cut out this area of his glasses. So I'll zoom in. And if you hold your spacebar, you can turn your cursor into a hand, which means you can click and drag to move it around. And now there's a few ways to select these glasses. One of them is the Lasso tool up here. If you click and hold, you have a round lasso tool, polygonal, or magnetic. So let's try the round lasso tool. And you'll notice that your cursor turns into this sort of shape. So what you can do is you just draw and then release your mouse right at the end and you get this selection. So what you're telling Photoshop is, I want you to ignore everything on the outside and just focus on the inside. But I'd like this to be his whole glasses. So when you have a selection like this, it isolates Photoshop's focus to that selection. I want to turn this off. So you go up to Select and click Deselect. If you make a mistake, you can click Select, Reselect, and it will bring it back. So for now, I'm going to deselect. So I'm going to carefully draw around the lens of the glasses. And if I can't make it all the way around, what I'll do is just return my mouse to the top, and I have this much selected. Now I can hold my Shift key, and you'll notice when I hold Shift, there's a little plus sign. That means I'm telling Photoshop, add this new part to that first made selection. And then release. So you can see you can go around and perfect out your selection to the full area, and you don't have to do it all in one step. And I can neaten up the edges every time holding Shift in between. If you make a mistake and want to delete a selection, I've made this mistake out here, you hold the Alt key and you'll get a little minus sign. And now when you draw, the area that you finish up with will be removed. Another way to do your selection is to use the polygonal lasso tool. And how this one works is you do multiple clicks. So I'm going to hold Shift so that I can add to this selection. Click. And it's kind of like drawing with the sides of a stop sign, all these little straight edges. And you'll notice that this isn't as perfect as the free drawn, but in some circumstances, this kind of lasso tool is actually a quicker and easier option. And there we have our selection. I can zoom out. And if at any point you think you might want to use this selection later on and don't want to have to redo it, you can go Select, Save Selection, and I'll call these glasses. And if at any point you deselect it and work on the Photoshop file for an hour and you're like, oh, I'd like to have that selection back, you can go Select, Load Selection, and open up Glasses or whatever you've named it, and it's there. So what I've done is I've selected here. And what this means is if I use the brush tool, which is B for shortcut, if I use the brush tool, and let's say I'm using this black color, I can draw, and it only appears in that selection like that. And that means you can edit a part of an image and isolate a certain area. So I'm going to undo that, and undo is Control Option Z or Command Alt. And undo is Control Alt Z or Command Alt Z on Mac, and I'll just step that back. You can also go up to Edit, Undo State Change, Step Forward, and Step Backward. So we have his glasses here. Now what I'd like to do is I'd like to duplicate this part of the image so that I have it free to modify. Make sure you have the layer, make sure you have the original layer selected, and go up to Layer, New, Layer, New, Layer via Copy or Command J, Control J. And you'll notice our selection disappears, but we have this third layer. And now to check what this third layer is, you can turn off your lower layer by hitting the eye icon. And you'll see that we have the glasses shapes here. I'll double click to name that glasses. And now I'm going to change some of these colors. And now I'd like to change the colors of these lenses. And an easy way to do that is to go Image, Adjustments, Hue Saturation. And you'll notice again that my glasses layer is selected. And in here you have 3 sliders, which will change different features of your image. Saturation is how bold and strong the colors are, so you'll notice I can bring it up, or I can take it down and make it black and white. So I'm going to bring these up, make them a bit over the top color-wise. And then the hue is actually changing the base color. And I'll slide this back. You'll notice that it slides all of the colors back. Let's go let's go about there. You can also tick the preview button on and off to see how the work has changed. So I'm happy with that. I'll hit OK, and I'll zoom out and have a look. So now you can see that I have my glasses layer over my boy layer. If I hit the eye, you can see that I can turn the layer on and off and see what it looked like before. And I really prefer these colored lenses. Okay, so let's add something else in. I'll use this abstract sort of ink underwater image. I'll bring that into Photoshop. And now if I wanted to copy this and paste this over my boy, I could use the Lasso tool. I'll do a quick little selection here. And if I'm doing this, it looks pretty good. And I can go Edit, Copy, and then go back to my poster and go Edit, Paste. But you'll notice it has this strong cutout line around the outside, which is something that we don't want. So I'm going to hit Delete to delete this layer. And I'll go back to my acrylic art layer. And I'll go back to my ink image. I'll deselect that. There's a tool in here called Color Range. So click Select Color Range. And what this does is you get a little eyedropper icon. And this is a way to choose and make a selection of a specific color in an image. If I click on the black, you'll notice that I have this white background over here. If I click on the green, you'll notice that the green area is selected. If I click on the purple, again with the purple. So I want to grab just the purple here. And you'll notice as I click around the image, different purples are selected. So I'll click a medium purple here. And this fuzziness slider will tell Photoshop that you'd like it to choose extra purples close to that purple, or only choose that purple by moving it to the left. And the white area in this window here is Photoshop telling you the area that it will select. So I'll go about there. When I click OK, you'll notice that there's this really odd selection here. And this selection actually has partial selections with opacity. That looks good. I'm going to hit Edit and Copy. And I'll go back to my poster and click Edit, Paste. And you'll see here that we have something here that we couldn't do with the Lasso tool. And that's really subtle opaque pixels. And that's a really subtle selection with actually like half invisible pixels. If I use my Move tool, I can move it around. You see that it covers up the boy, but you can see through some of these areas. This is really nice. This is exactly what I wanted. So you'll notice that the smoke is a little bit too strong and bold. There's two ways to lessen this. Every layer, you can change the opacity. And when you do that, it'll make it a bit faded. So what I want is I want this to look like this effect is actually coming out of his glasses. So I'll put that about there. But still, it's a bit too blocky. So I'm going to return this opacity up. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to choose normal. And what this list is here is it's the blend mode. And you'll notice as I go through, it changes the effect that it has underneath. And the one we're looking for is overlay. And what overlay does is it tells a layer to blend in, and you'll notice that it's stronger on darker areas and not as strong on lighter areas. And so what I can do is I can put this over his glasses like that. And I like how that looks. It's faded. It's there, but it's not too strong. But this part on his face, I don't really like that. So you can use your eraser tool. And your eraser tool is E for shortcut. Now, depending on your eraser, you might want to change the size of it. So what you can do is right click, and you'll get this pop up. This is where you can change the size. And I'd like it a bit bigger, about there. And you can change it to be smooth on the edges or crisp on the edges. I'm going to use smooth on the edges like that. And then to click back over here on the left, it will remove that pop-up, making sure you have the smoke layer selected. You can now come in and erase. And you'll notice that it's not erasing it perfectly. That's because the opacity of the eraser is set to 59%. Let's bring that up to 100. So now I can go in and gently erase all these edges. And now I might need some fine tuning, so I'll zoom in. And I'll right click to change the size of my eraser, make it a little bit smaller, and then I can come in here and erase with more fine detail. And I'll zoom out. And that looks really cool. It's a very subtle effect. So let's add in another image onto this. I have this image of these marbles. And I'd like to choose one of these marbles here. So I could use the Lasso tool and draw a circle all the way around it. But you'll notice that my circle isn't very perfect. It's kind of hard to get a good circle. So I'll deselect that. And I'm going to use this tool up the top, which is the Marquee Tool. And this lets you do rectangles and squares, ellipses, and then rows and columns. Let's choose the elliptical Marquee tool. And this basically means you can draw a circle wherever you'd like by clicking and dragging. And to keep it to be a perfect circle, you want to hold Shift, click and drag, and get it to about the size of the marble. And then I'd like this to have a soft edge to it, and so the trick to do with that is to go to Select, Modify, Feather. And feather stands for giving it a bit of a gradient on the edge. And I'll give it maybe 3 pixels and click OK. You won't notice a difference, but there has been a change that's been made. So let's edit copy and go back to the poster, edit paste, and there's our marble. And you'll notice if I zoom up, the edges aren't perfectly cut out. They have a nice little gradient to them. Let's name our layer by double clicking. And now I want to move this over, and I'm going to make it so the boy kind of has this globe around his head. But you can see that it's a bit too dominant. If I change the opacity, it's still a little bit too strong. So I'm going to change the blend mode, and I'm going to make this one overlay as well. And you'll notice that the details of the boy's face come through, and the marble acts sort of like a texture. I like the marble to be a bit bigger, so I'm going to use Edit Free Transform, and I'll stretch out the marble, again holding Shift to make sure it stays proportions correct, and I'll go to about there, and when I'm happy I'll click the tick. And now the one thing I don't like is the boy's hair here. It comes too close to the marble edge, so I'm going to go back to the boy and then use my eraser tool, which is E, and then erase out his hair. And now the eraser doesn't look as realistic because it's so little, so I'm going to right click, make it a bit bigger, and now I can come in and erase, and I'll erase this area here. And you'll notice that the edge of my marble has disappeared. That's because there's white underneath. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to paint a little bit of gray behind here. And so to do that, I recommend you always make a new layer by clicking this new layer button down the bottom, and I'll call this gray. And this means that any painting that I do will only appear on this layer, and it won't affect the boy layer underneath. So you can choose your brush tool, which is B, and this will be the size of my brush, but I want to change the color. Over here are your 2 color options, your foreground and background. Double click on the first square, and you get a color changer. And you can change this by changing in the rainbow bar or changing the saturation. So let's choose a gray color about here and click OK. With my gray layer selected, using my brush, I can color over. You'll notice that it's turning out pink. That's because we have the overlay of the marble. But up the top, it'll come out gray. So that's brought back a little bit of the marble edge to the background. And you can see you can turn the gray layer on and off and see the difference. So just like the eraser, you want to make sure your opacity is set to what you'd like. I'm going to make this 100%. And now with my gray layer selected, I can start to color in. And now that's a little bit too strong, so I'm going to undo that by going Edit, Undo. And I'm going to take the opacity down to maybe 40%, and I'll try it again. That looks much better. So that's something to remember. Changing your opacity on your brush or your eraser will have different effects. Using that same theory, let's create another layer, and I'm going to call this White Fade. This bottom area down here, I'd like to give us some white space to put our eventual titles. So I've created this new layer. I'm going to double click here, change my color to white. And now I'm going to change my brush to be really big. So I right click, change the size, maybe even a little bit bigger. There we go. And I'm going to change the opacity to be 50%. And down here, I'm just going to draw across the bottom, and you'll notice that I get a nice little fade. Then I'm going to repeat, going left and right, to give myself a little bit of a fade. And now you notice the white fade isn't covering up the marble. I'll choose my Move tool. In this area, the white fade isn't covering it up, and that's because layer stack has an importance of view. Whatever's on top, Photoshop will see is on top. So you need to click and drag, and you'll notice that you get these blue lines, and that will show where the layer will eventually be when you release your mouse. Let's bring it to the top and release. And now you can see that my white fade is covering up the marble. If I turn this on and off, you can see that it's giving a nice fade to the bottom of the image. So I've done a bit of work. It's time to save. Click File, Save. And let's bring in one more image for texture. there's this image here of these metal boxes. So I'll open that up. And once again, I'm going to copy this whole image by clicking and dragging. Bring it over to my poster file, return to the middle and release my mouse. And you can see that it covers up everything. It's the uppermost layer, and I'm going to change the name to be boxes. And because it's covering up everything because of its full opacity, I'd like to change my blend mode to be overlay. And already you can see that there's different effects that you can get. This has changed our image completely. Now I kind of like these three boxes here. So I'll bring them down to about here. But I don't like how much it covers up the boy's face. So with the boxes layer selected, I'm going to use my eraser tool. Make sure my opacity is set to 100%. I'll right click to make it a little bit bigger. And I'm going to come in here and I'm going to go through and slowly erase. I'd like my eraser to be a little bit bigger. About there. And then I can gently erase. Like that. And because I have my eraser soft round, that means, click over here on the left, that means that I get this nice fade. So now I've erased a bit of my boxes image. Using my move tool, I can move my layer up and down and kind of find a spot that I like it. I think I like it about there. So you can see that we have many different images to choose from, and each of these could be added in, and using the blend mode of overlay, it would give a different effect. So now it's time to put in our titles. So to do that, select your text tool, which is T, click once. Photoshop may put in some dummy text. You can just hit delete, and I'm going to call this predictor. And my font size may not be what I like, so you can just click and drag to highlight, and up here you can change your font details. So let's go Helvetica Neue, and I'm going to make this ultralight. And the color, I'm going to make it, let's see, a purple color. So when you click this button up here, you'll get an eyedropper, and you can choose all the colors to relate to your image. So I'll choose a purple color, and I might make it a little bit darker, and click OK. And now the text is a little bit too small, so I highlight my text, and I can change the size here. Sometimes the biggest font size isn't as big as you'd like. So what you can do is click your tick to accept your changes, and now you have your text layer here. Using your move tool, move it into a position, and then we're going to use the edit free transform tool. So again, you get these bounding boxes, and you hold shift and drag out your text, move it into place. If you did want to rotate, anytime when you're free transforming, if you move your mouse out to the sides, you'll get this rotate option. So you can put the poster title on a bit of an angle. I don't like that, so I'll undo that. I'm going to keep mine horizontal, and I'll click the tick to accept my changes. And the font still is a little bit too thin, so I'll use my T tool, click on the text, and then highlight it. And I'm going to make this light. Yeah, I like that more. I'll click the tick, and then use my move tool. I'll move it down here. Something to do with text is sometimes it's better to have space in between the characters. And I'll show you how to do that. Click your T tool, click once on your text layer, drag to highlight it, and then what you're going to do is go up to Window and choose Character. And it will bring this pop-up window here. And this gives you some extra options that aren't included up here on the top. And the thing you're looking for is this V and A, and this is the distance between the letters. So I'm going to try making this 100. And if I hit enter, you'll see that it spaced out my letters. Let's try 200 and hit enter. That's really far. I kind of like that, so I'll hit the tick, but now you can see that my text is outside of my image. So again, I'll choose my move tool and click edit, free transform. And I'll hold shift as I shrink down my text and bring it to about there and hit my tick. So now you can see that gives it a bit more of a movie poster feel, the space between the letters. So let's add in another text layer. You can actually right click on a text layer and click duplicate layer. And I'll call this Next Summer and click OK. And you'll notice that if I use my move tool, I now have a second layer. So I'm going to change this by using my text tool, highlight all of my text, and I'll type in coming this summer and click my tick. You'll notice again, It's way far out past the edge of my file. So I'll use my Move tool, Edit, Free Transform. Because I can't grab the edge of this, I can zoom out. And holding Shift, I'll bring this down. I'll make it about that big and click my tick. I can move it up and I'll zoom back in. And I don't like the color of this. I like this to be black. So I'll use my text tool and highlight it and click up here to change the color to be black and click OK. Then I can click the tick to accept my changes and we have my poster coming together really nicely. Let's give our poster one more text line up the top, kind of like a window into the story. I'll duplicate this layer and I'll call this intro line and click OK. Using my Move tool, I can click and drag this up. Another way to activate your text layer is to just double click on this T icon in the layers and it automatically selects. And I'm going to type in, he sees the future. And I'd like this line to bring down here. So I'll click over here and hit return. And now you'll notice that my text is actually covering up the rest of the text. That's because the spacing here in this setting is not correct. So select all of your text by clicking Command A or Control A. And then in here, you can click Auto, and it will automatically space out your text. If you want your text to be further apart, you can choose one of these different options, and it will change the spacing. But I'll keep this as Auto. And then I'll hit my tick, and using my Move tool, I'll bring this over to the side, and that looks really good. Again, I'll save my Photoshop file. Now let's bring in another image. I have this glasses icon, and this has two colors on it. Another way of selecting a certain part of an image is to use the Magic Wand tool. If you click and hold here on the left, and then release your mouse on the Magic Wand tool, you'll notice your icon changes to the wand. Now you can click on any color, and it will choose what you're clicking on. I want to choose the black, so I'll click on the black, and you'll see my selection has automatically grabbed all of the black areas. If you're doing this on a color image, and it's not selecting enough of the black or the color you're choosing, you can change the tolerance to be higher or lower. That looks good to me, so I'll go Edit, Copy. I'll go back to my poster file, and go Edit, Paste, and my glasses are there. So again, it's a little bit too big, so I'll go Edit, Free Transform, and I'll shrink this down, and using my Shift key, that'll keep the proportions constrained, and I'll bring it down here, and click Tick. And now using my arrow keys, I'll adjust where this is. To do that, you need to click your Move tool. I like to move this a little bit, so I'll click my Move tool, but instead of using my mouse, I'll use my arrow keys to move it left and right. So that looks good there like that. That's a little bit of a logo icon for the show. Okay, let's see if I want to add in anything else. I kind of like this image here. Let's open this up. Now I'd like to copy this whole thing, so I'll click this layer and drag. And now you'll notice that my Photoshop file, I can't find it because I have too many files open. So I'll release my mouse, and I'll close some images here by hitting these little X's. And if Photoshop pops up an error saying Save Changes, if this is a file you're not actually working on, you can click Don't Save. So now we just have my poster and my new background. So I'll click and drag, move it over to my poster, and then release. And you'll notice it's a little bit small, so again, let's Edit, Free Transform, and I'll hold Shift as I click and drag this outside. Now I'd like to rotate this, so I'll move my mouse down to the outside of the box and rotate. And if you hold Shift, you'll notice that it constrains it to certain angles. So about there, I'll click and drag, holding Shift again, I'll stretch this out, and if I needed more room, I can also zoom out to see, and when I'm happy, I can click the tick. So again, this is covering up everything, so let's change the blend mode to be Overlay. And you'll notice that it gives this really interesting texture effect. If I turn it on and off, you can see what the image looks like before and after. And I recommend putting in a layer, testing it out, seeing what it looks like, and if you like it, leave it in, or feel free to turn the layer off and go with your original idea. So I like that in there. Let's name the layer to be Blue Texture. And now you'll notice that it's actually affecting the bottom predictor text layer. That's because predictor is below this blue texture. If I didn't want it to affect the predictor text, click and drag and move this to be on the top. And you'll notice now that the text is actually the full maroon. so that's something to keep in mind. The overlay feature only works on layers that are underneath the layer that has the overlay. When you're experimenting with your layers as well, a quick tip is to select a layer, and then you can go Command-I or Control-I. And what that does is it inverts the layer, so it makes a negative image. And you'll see as I do this, it changes it from the blue and purple to orange and yellow. This is a quick way to get a total different feel and look to your design, just by doing Command-I or Control-I. If I go down to the boy layer and click Invert, you'll notice that it gives it a negative effect. So this can be a really nice effect done quickly and easily with a photo of a person. So I'm happy with that, so I'll click File, Save. So this Photoshop file is now saved with all these layers. So if I want to come back and make some changes later on or make some edits to the text, I can do that easily. But now let's flatten this image and save it as a JPEG, able to be printed, or something smaller. Click File, Export, Export As, and here's your preview. You'll notice that you have the file size over here, 12.8 megabytes, and your format. Let's change this to be JPEG. So our JPEG is going to be 7.3 megabytes. Right now you can see that this view is 25% of the original size. So if I click and zoom up, you'll see that the poster is actually very large. Now this is good for printing this out. This poster would print out on A3 or A2 quite well, because we're at 100%, and you can see that this is a really large file, and the font is still very crisp. So this is something to keep in mind when you're doing some printing. Zoom up to 100% and check the quality. So I'm actually happy with that. So let's save that by clicking Export All, and I'll call this Poster Print. And click Save. And that returns back to our Photoshop file. If I wanted to make a smaller image, let's click File, Export, Export As. And this time the first thing I'm going to do is change the scale. So I get this to a zoom that I like. 25% is fine. Say I wanted to email this to my lecturer, but I don't want it to be too big. So I'll change this to be 25 in the scale and hit return. And what you can see is our image size didn't change, but our percent down here did. So now instead of this being 25% of our view, this is 100. If I zoom up, you'll notice that the image is pixelated. That's because the maximum size is this one. It still looks really good, and you'll notice that our file size over here is quite small. We can take the quality down. Let's go to 50% and hit return. It'll adjust the image on the inside here. You can't really see a difference, but you'll notice that now we're down to 104 kilobytes. So what we've done is we've changed the quality and the scale to make this image still look good, but be much smaller file size. I'll click Export All, and I'll call this Poster for Email. And click Save. We're back to our Photoshop file. Before we close our Photoshop file, one thing to make sure is that you still have all of your layers. Sometimes you can accidentally flatten your Photoshop layers into one single layer. And if you do that and then save your Photoshop file, when you reopen it, there will only be one layer. So make sure you have all your layers there. Click File, Save. And if Save is already grayed out, that means it's saved. So you can click Close. And if I go back to the desktop, you can see that we have our poster.psd file, which has all our layers. We have the poster print and poster for email. If I open up the poster print, and if I open up the poster for email, you'll notice that they're close in size. But if I zoom up on the poster for email, you'll notice that it's pixelated. Then if I zoom up on the poster for print, you'll notice that the quality is much higher. So this is something to keep in mind. Make sure that you save your files for print at the high quality, and anything else you can make it much smaller to make it easy to send. So that shows that with a bunch of different images and textures, you can easily create something in Photoshop, something creative and impressive.